An atheistic worldview is one which struggles to furnish a framework for rationality. I argued this in this video that I posted a few days ago. I also made 2 responses to Danny Philtalk showing that his critiques of my argument were not successful. However, recently a third player has entered the game, so let's see what he has to say.
Danny's argument was not the Christian God is deceptive, so there's an inconsistency with saying your cognitive faculties are reliable. It was that God could have morally sufficient reasons to deceive you, and so the probability of whether or not your cognitive faculties are reliable is inscrutable. Danny's argument is built off of the fundamental premises that skeptical theism is based off of, and more specifically the idea that we are not in a position epistemically to make inferences about the probability of God having reasons for or against some action.
Now, the rest of this video is mainly Brendan trying to press this objection by saying that I am a skeptical theist, and because I am this skeptical theist, I am unable to rule out the possibility of a divine deception under my worldview. And because I'm in this position where I can't say what God would or wouldn't morally be able to do, I therefore am in the same position as an atheist, at least as I presented in my argument. Now, I would object to a significant number of these remarks, as I don't label myself as a skeptical theist, at least depending on how one defines that, and I don't think I am in an epistemic position which prevents me from being able to make any inferences on what God may or may not be able to do based on moral concerns. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to just, for the sake of argument, assume that I really am in this position that Brendan is pressing on me, because it doesn't even matter for my argument. This objector, like Danny, has still failed to understand the nature of my argument, and because of this, their attempts to reverse this argument on me continue to fail. First, let's recall what my argument was. My argument was that atheistic stories which incorporate a certain view of the mind and a certain story of how our brains arose entail that our cognitive faculties arose in a way that didn't favor them being truth conducive, and that because of this, atheism has this big epistemic problem. My argument is that atheism, or at least the most dominant atheist story, stories of atheism that incorporate these elements, I'm just going to say atheism for short, they entail believing that one's cognitive faculties did not originate in a truth-favoring way, and that if one believes one's cognitive faculties did not originate in a truth-favoring way, or if that's an entailment of one's beliefs, then they have this big epistemic problem. My argument is not, if atheism is true, then possibly your cognitive faculties originated in a non-truth favoring way. My argument is not just some general Cartesian-like skepticism where I just say, oh, well, you could be wrong, therefore, big problem. My argument is that the dominant atheist story is one which actively entails cognitive faculties which did not originate through a truth-favoring process, and that is a big issue. To put this succinctly, my argument is that if P, then Q, if Q, then Z, P, therefore Z. My objection is that atheism entails Z, not that it entails the possibility of Z, but that Z is an actual entailment of atheism. Now, let's turn back to seeing how this atheist, Brendan, responds to my argument.
God could have morally sufficient reasons to deceive you.
Did everybody catch that? The atheist argument is that if theism is true, it could be the case that my cognitive faculties originated from a process which didn't favor truth. Their argument is that my beliefs entail the possibility, the epistemic possibility, that God created my faculties to not be truth conducive. I can't rule that possibility out. This is what they're arguing. To put this simply, the first premise in my original argument is something like if P then Q, whereas the first premise in their argument that you all just heard is something like if P then possibly Q. Now, this is a giant difference, and if they recognize this difference, they would come to see how their attempts to reverse my arguments fail. Let's take their first premise and plug that into the rest of the argument that I gave and see what their conclusion ends up being. So premise 1, if P, then possibly Q. Again, this is their first premise they're asserting. If God created me, then possibly God did so in a way in which he wasn't favoring my cognitive faculties being truth conducive. That's a possibility. I can't rule that out. So if P, then possibly Q. If Q, then Z, right? Like that's my original premise from my argument, so they're employing that. 3, P, for, therefore possibly Z. So my original argument entailed Z. Their argument entails possibly Z. So the reversal they are trying to run has a fundamental disconnect from my original argument. I did not make a big stink that atheism possibly entails Z. I made a big stink that atheism actually entails Z. If our atheist friends really want to reverse this argument on me, they will need to show that theism doesn't just possibly entail Q, they need to show that theism entails Q. Or put another way, the issue is not with my ability to rule out the possibility of Q given P. The issue is they need to rule out the possibility of not Q given P. So again, to summarize, my argument entails an actual epistemic problem for atheism, whereas their argument only shows a possible epistemic problem under theism. In light of this, theism is the more coherent worldview, and I want to thank Danny and Brendan for helping me make my point.